Lewis.
My question may have been answered, but perhaps I could just briefly clarify. Perhaps I misunderstood. I thought it was 2/3 of the people present at the time. Am I wrong on that?
No, it's 2/3 of the members of council, all members.
Well, I will be speaking against the reconsideration. It's certainly an issue for me, the amount of taxes that businesses pay. But the real issue, I think, and the real solution to that issue is this. We only have one class, one catch-all into which all businesses fall. What we really need, and what the solution is 2 classes for businesses, small and large. And then what we could be doing is charging a lower tax rate for smaller businesses and a larger tax rate for the big banks that are downtown. Absent a division of that class, the business class, into 2 separate subclasses, one for small business and the other for large business, absent that division, a reconsideration leads inevitably to the following situation. Ordinary homeowners will begin to pay significantly more in property taxes on their homes in order to reduce the taxes of the big banks located in our downtown. Now, I know that Councillor Ladner and Councillor Sullivan are big fans of the big banks located downtown, but I'm not. I'm a big fan of my neighbor who lives next door to me. I'm going to vote in favor of my neighbor. Councillor Ladner can vote in favor of the Royal Bank, and we'll see where the rest of council votes. Thank you very much.
Councillor Green.
Yes, I had a question also, and it's just a procedural one. When something's sent for us to for staff to draw up a bylaw, that is to reflect that particular decision, is it not?
Yes.
And not to add or alter in any way the decision is made. This tells us how this decision will be put into.
That's right.
So then how, given that this is a special thing, it's a bylaw consideration, how can we go back then and reconsider what led us to the bylaw?
And, well, but that is the point. And I think council's been through this discussion before. The bylaw reflects the outcome of the previous discussion, which is no shift, right? And that's why it has to be a reconsideration of whether or not you should revisit that decision. You're not revisiting the bylaw that's in front of you. It would result in a change in the bylaw, but you're going back to the root issue, which is why it requires reconsideration.
And then given that, if there was a change in the decision, then we would have to send this, we would not consider this bylaw, but this bylaw would no longer.
That's correct.
And it would go back to legal department.
And would come back on Thursday.
And come back on Thursday, so they're pretty fast lawyers over there.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bass.
I think that reconsideration should be reserved for only the most dramatic and difficult situations. And I don't think this is that case. I think we have examples, for example, the RAV line, which is reconsidered and reconsidered until a desired vote was obtained. And I think I am going to lean against reconsideration here, although I would be, if the vote comes up, I would be in favor of shifting a tax instead of the average property owner paying another $30. I think the shift from $30 to the property owner versus the $308 that the average business owner, and that's the modest-sized business owner, is now having to pay, I think is a shift in the right direction. But I don't believe that we should keep reconsidering things, so I am going to vote against reconsideration.
Just for your information, there was no reconsideration on the RAV vote. They were all new motions. Councillor, oh, I'm sorry, hold on, I skipped you there, Councillor Roberts. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. I'm going to be voting against the reconsideration. And once this is settled, I hope that it is defeated. I think we went through the proper process on the committee meeting where we heard from the public. The problem I have is that we heard only from small businesses and the Board of Trade. And I feel that if we are going to make a shift in the distribution of taxes, that we need to hear much more from the public. I don't think we ever really heard about homeowners and what might be the plight of homeowners who, it sounds simple, a 1% shift, but we've heard the figures before, and that ends up to be a much more significant tax increase for the residential homeowners. We passed, and the thing we're considering now that was upheld at the last committee meeting was an increase of 2.99% for residential owners. If a 1% shift is made of the commercial tax onto the residential, that increases the tax for homeowners to 5.2%. That's a very dramatic increase for homeowners who have been counting on what we passed previously, was a 2.99. We based our budget on those figures. And what I feel is that we have not heard from the people where there are many homeowners who cannot face significant increases. Even if the dollar amount is relatively little, we have very significant increase in the TransLink taxes this year. We have high increase in the GVRD taxes because of the water filtration plant. When we start adding these all together, that has an impact. We need to hear from those people before we would have this kind of shift. In our housing report that we just considered earlier, it pointed out there were 4,800 households in the city, owner households, who are on the verge at risk of being homeless. And so a tax shift of this kind could have severe impacts in a way that we're not even considering. As we know, taxes are passed along to renters. Renters are, in the end of the day, the ones that pay those taxes. What will be the impact on the renters in our city? The majority of people are renters, and these will be passed along, and it's not something that we have considered. So I don't think at this stage of the game we should make this change. I do think we should consult more broadly. I had a real sympathy with the small businesses that were faced with challenges, no question about that. I hope we turn down this reconsideration, and then I would like to make a motion that we seek a report from our staff that would give us a more holistic picture of this tax situation. What are the variables that small businesses are facing? What are the most important variables? Maybe it's the rent they pay. Maybe it's the lack of parking. Maybe it's a whole bunch of things that the city can look at to help small business without giving a whole shift, as Councillor Lewis pointed out, to a whole number of businesses that don't need the city's handout to them. So I think we need to focus on small businesses, but I think we need to look into really what are the variables, not just say, oh yes, it's definitely the taxes and that's the only thing that hurts small businesses. So after I hope this is defeated, we can then go on, and they have highlighted, I think, an issue we need to deal with, but we need to deal with it in depth, and we need to study it and do it properly, not just sort of say, oh, I've got the answer, and grab it and make that kind of tax shift without looking at all the repercussions for the residents of this city.
Councillor Sullivan.
Yes, I definitely support Councillor Ladner's efforts to bring fairness into our tax system. For Councillor Lewis, we used to have two different classes of commercial. We had industry and we had commercial, and industry paid about 10 times the rate of residential. And I don't know how we would implement Councillor Lewis's ideas on how to discriminate only against capitalist businesses against non-capitalist business. Unfortunately, I don't think you have non-capitalist businesses, and Councillor Lewis might be surprised that he may have neighbors who work for banks who live near him. In fact, they are regular citizens. The other problem that Councillor Roberts brought up about having a committee to research this, we've had a series of committees who have looked into this. A while ago we had a task force. One half of them were residential taxpayers, one half of them were business taxpayers. They endorsed this effort. We've had KPMG do a study, and the study there indicated that businesses pay far more taxes and use far less services, city services, than residents. So it's way out of whack. And the issue, I think, an important issue of equity is no taxation without representation. Unfortunately, we have a segment of society, the businesses, who don't vote. They're not allowed to vote. And they are not, even though they pay so much more taxes than the residents, they do not have a vote. And it's very easy to load up the taxes on the business sector, but and not to worry about it politically. But I think it will come back to haunt us. The tax rate against our businesses, if they go way out of whack, if they go too high, we will find that many of our businesses will be struggling. And we heard loud and clear from many businesses that this is already happening. So I will support Councillor Ladner's motion.
Well, I think that we had a very long session listening very carefully to small businesses, and I agree that small businesses have been very seriously impacted by taxes, and that's why I moved a motion that was passed that we asked the provincial government to look at setting up another class category or categories so that the burden is not unfairly on small retail, small businesses. You may have forgotten that that did pass, and I think that we do need to get staff to report back and see how we can support small business in the city. I have some question about the arguments that businesses don't get services. I think that the workers who work in these businesses actually do use city services, whether or not they live in the city. I would oppose opening this up at this time. I think that I'm hoping the Councillor Roberts is bringing something forward about a staff report on how we can really properly consult with businesses, but also from homeowners to see how we can address these concerns. So I will be opposing the reconsideration.
Thank you. Councillor Ladner.
Well, I think this is quite precious that every time, the only time Councillor Roberts ever cares about taxpayers is when business is going to get shafted in return. We vote we voted $32 million in new spending here without blinking at the thought of what the taxpayers would have to do to pick up the bills. And now suddenly when it's a matter of, well, get the businesses to pay for it, we have this sudden surge of concern about the taxpayers. We did actually vote against a comprehensive report on this at the last meeting because we decided that it's not a matter that can be decided by a comprehensive report. It's a very simple matter. We're just simply talking about the equity of the tax shift from the two classes. And the idea that the city would be better off with no big businesses and a whole lot of little businesses, I think is a pretty sad reflection of this council. If that's really the vision that we have here, that we'll go after all the big businesses and we'll let the little businesses survive. The really important and decent little businesses all would like to be bigger businesses. That's the news for some members of this council. So I hope that our passion for the taxpayers in general and the homeowner taxpayers extends to the other spending items that are coming up today that I think we're going to be quite happy to spend the money on, and we're suddenly not going to be too concerned about the homeowners. So let's be real. You have to ask the question, do you care about the business taxpayers in this city? And do you care about the gross inequity that we're visiting with them by pumping the rates up to 6.2 to 1? And if you do, then you'll vote for reconsideration.
Councillor Louis.
Thank you, Your Worship. First of all, I'd like to thank staff for their report that I was able to speak to last time because I was ill. But it was a very comprehensive report. It was a report that I had asked for, and I thank Council for this, or Councillor Ladner for this opportunity to speak because I thought I'd missed my opportunity. Specifically on the report that Mr. Bain produced for us was that there is no simple answer. This is a complex situation that revolves around tax share versus tax ratio. We currently have tax share, Board of Trade, and many small business owners are focusing on the ratio. But what has caused that ratio to change is property values. Residential property values have risen tremendously over this past period of time, thereby changing the ratio. But what has stayed constant is the share of tax between the residential class and the business class. That has remained constant, and the rationale for that was decided in 1983 by previous council that it is an appropriate model for us to follow because rather than leaving it to the market, meaning the market values in terms of residential class value or business class value to decide on where that distribution of tax goes, it was to be a fixed share. And in council's wisdom of the day, they decided that it was the best approach. Rather than having these wide fluctuations, we know where our money is coming from, and people have relative stability, not based on market valuation. So, enter today. We're asked once again to make an adjustment. In this instance, we're asked to make an adjustment because it seems that the ratio is unfair. But has the share of taxes actually changed? The share of taxes has not changed, and that's what we base our current tax system on. If we were to change to a ratio versus tax share, what happens is, if in fact business class property values rise, then it's once again skews the formula. If residential property owners, their value drops again, and we go to a different fixed ratio, if residential property owner value goes down significantly, well then we're back into a soup that we may not want to get into because then we'll once again be saying that it's not fair. So Councillor Sullivan cited a KPMG report that was done in 1995 that was a study about consumption. But that's only a very small component of what we need to assess in terms of what's an appropriate share of taxes, where our taxes should be coming from. Consumption is only a small portion. And I would say that it's inappropriate. And I hope the task staff with coming back with some be-all and end-all way formula for us to guide us through this murkiness that we have. And in the end, I understand that it was a task that's really unattainable. And although staff have done a good job in trying to help us come to that conclusion. For me, I think it's the end result that we're after. What we're after is a balanced, sustainable community, a balanced, sustainable city that provides jobs, meaning business here in our city, but also provides an opportunity for residents that work at those jobs to live in our city. So if we were to only cater to the business, and I'm not saying that that's the possibility here, then we may not have any residents that actually live in the city working at our jobs that we have here, or vice versa. We may be so resident rich, but job poor, and that would be an appropriate balance either. Now, some of us happened to be at the Law Center a couple of weeks ago talking about transportation within the region and the impact of jobs on that formula, of where those jobs lie in the region. And we know that jobs only account for 20% of that formula. Entertainment and shopping account for 30% each, and then 9% for education, and then diminishing values for all the rest of them. Jobs are only a small component of transportation. But we do know that out of the jobs in the city, 61% of them come from outside the city. So it seems as if the formula is working. We still have enough jobs to import people from outside areas into our city. Although the trend in the last 10 years is that are the jobs that are created in the city in the last 10 years, only 31% are actually residents of the city. So we need to make some adjustments to make jobs available and make make it affordable for those businesses to stay in our city. It's unfortunate that we don't have a solution to this. The amount of money that business pays in comparison to residential perhaps is inappropriate, but like other councillors have said, there are a range of variables here that we need to consider before we just transfer, as previous councils have done, because they think it's appropriate, or the lobbying groups that have come before us have spoken loudly and therefore we've reacted. I did it myself in our first year where I transferred 0.5%. But really not knowing what the reasons were for that transfer, other than that the ratio seemed to be very high. And benchmarked against the previous ratios, an adjustment was necessary or appropriate. Having gone through the exercise with the staff's report, I no longer find that it is appropriate to look at the ratio. Perhaps the share needs to be adjusted, but we need much more information before we adjust the share, because we're not going to be moving, I hope, to a ratio model as we had previous to 1983. I think our fixed share is appropriate. Perhaps the share needs to be adjusted. But we need to have more information and decide what sort of vision, what sort of balanced community we want before we make that adjustment. So I'm going to vote against reconsideration, and I want to, though I do want to make some adjustments to help small business as well.
Thank you. Councillor Cadman.
Well, I'm going to be voting against reconsideration as well, and the reason is simple. If we get into a situation where that which cannot be attained at a council meeting is then brought up again at the bylaw stage, then what we get into is every decision of this council can be revisited depending on who's in the room at the bylaw stage. And it was Councillor Ladner who told us that he wouldn't want to do that with developers who had invested money on the basis of a decision made by council on the assumption that that decision would be adhered to in the implementation of the bylaw. So now he's got another perspective on it, which is that he now, having lost this at council, now wants to revisit this in the hope that at the bylaw stage we can change this. And I think that's inappropriate. It's not the way to go. But the fundamentals here is Councillor Ladner is proposing, and let's be very clear on this, he is proposing a 2.4% additional increase on the homeowner above the 2.99% that we agreed to as a council. That is the sum of what he is proposing. And it's very easy for somebody who's in a minority position to say, well, it wasn't just me. I had friends who made me do this. But when he goes to campaign in November, he will blame the tax increase on the majority of this council. And I think it's good politics, it's bad philosophy. I think we said very clearly the other day that we want to find a way to be able to differentiate between small and large business. We want to ask the provincial government to change the categories. And I think we need to find a way to talk with our citizens and talk with small business and have a fully open process to come to a determination about what are the appropriate tax rates to have each sector of our society pay the appropriate amount for their sector. But I don't think the appropriate time to do that is at the bylaw stage. And I think Councillor Ladner would be the first to argue that if this was a development bylaw, that there was a developer out there who had anticipated that council's previous approval, even though there may have been some people missing, should not then be revisited at a bylaw stage. And I would say he's right in that. We shouldn't be revisited in the bylaw stage. So I won't be supporting this revisitation.
Councillor
Thank you. I'll try to be very quick, Your Worship. First of all, just to correct a couple of things that Councillor Ladner pointed out. I don't think I heard anyone over there say that they wanted a city that had no large businesses and only small businesses. They may say that in the future, but they haven't said it yet. So you're setting up straw men to go against. Let's talk about this, your concern for the taxpayer and the fact that we actually put forward some positions where we would help people in need in this city. We'd help the libraries and other organizations that we felt needed it. And your concern, you gave your talk about the taxpayer, and then you moved to amend it to add $2 million to the budget. I mean, those things, we don't forget those things overnight. I also would point out that what we're dealing with here is an NPA legacy. That the reason that we have this imbalance is a result of years of the NPA. And now, all of a sudden, at the last possible moment, because I think he knows he will lose, Councillor Ladner is grandstanding again. And I find it to be offensive, but become used to it. And I was considering voting for the reconsideration, but after hearing that talk, I'm going to vote against it. And we're going to see if there aren't some other things that can develop here that maybe we can actually help people rather than trying to wear a mask of concern and not doing their work.
Councillor Ladner.
I'll be brief. Just to clarify for Councillor Cavan, I am not proposing that we change the bylaw at the bylaw stage. I'm proposing we change the decision that will result in a different bylaw. I'm not debating this bylaw that's in front of us here. If we change the decision, this bylaw will be mute and we'll have a moot, and we will have a different bylaw to consider on Thursday. So I'm not messing with the procedure as you're suggesting. To the point that we need more information, we had a wealth of information provided by staff at the last meeting, and I thought it was very clear, and it was spelled out right in the information. There are no simple answers. There are no formulas. It's something you just have to take some positions on and make some pragmatic decisions. Yes, it was the result of the NPA's years here that this situation, that we have this situation, and we agreed at the last meeting that the formula that the NPA came up with was a good one. We weren't going to mess with it. We weren't going to start changing, as Councillor Lewis says, to a different way of fixing the ratio and so on. But so what if it was something that came up during the NPA? The ratio has never been as high during the NPA as it has now, and the NPA recognized that you have to keep doing the shift to try to get some balance. The only way to balance this is to just, within the current framework, is to do an occasional shift, and that's all I'm suggesting today. And I just want to finish by playing to Councillor Lewis the kind of calculation that he likes to talk about. This would result in a change of 8 cents a day to the residential taxpayers, and that's $30 a year. For the same value, property value, commercial would be a reduction of about $140 in taxes. So we're not talking about a big load on the residential taxpayers. And if this council hadn't spent all the money that it had, there wouldn't be an issue around the increases to the residential taxpayers. So I'll be voting for the reconsideration.
Councillor Lewis, second time.
Well, I'll try to be fairly brief. 3 items. 1, process or procedure. Secondly, the ratio. And thirdly, what's good for business. Firstly, on the question of process or procedure, which Councillor Cavan has referred to already. Technically, I suppose Councillor Ladner is correct. We're not yet at the bylaw stage. We're not reconsidering our decision with the bylaw right here in front of us. The bylaw won't be in front of us for a number of days yet. But I still have to say this. Is there any information that has come to light from the day that we made the decision that you now wish to reconsider and today? And of course the answer is no. There's absolutely no new information that has become available to council that would merit or justify a re-debate, a reconsideration, a reanalysis. That was then. We had about 5 hours, literally 5 hours, of delegations, discussion, and debate. Now, if there was something earth-shattering that had happened after that day, between that day and today, some new piece of information that would merit us reconsidering the entire matter, fair enough, but there's not. The decision was then, and the supporters of the big banks lost the debate. Time to move forward. Now, on the question of ratios, I'm afraid that it does get far, far too complicated. But I think Councillor Louis very, very adequately and very thoroughly laid out all the different ways that we can compare the difference in taxes between businesses and residences. And it's very important to just momentarily reflect on a specific hypothetical example that perhaps puts this all into context. Right now we have a ratio of 5-point-something to 1. For a simpleton like me, let's just say 5 to 1. What exactly is that ratio? It isn't that businesses pay 5 times more than residences in total. It's not that at all. It's per an amount of worth of their property, they pay 5 times more. So for every $100,000 worth of the property, a business pays 5 more than a residence. If in the next year, all of the residential properties were to double in worth, with our current system, which is set up to respect and to protect property owners, the taxes that all those residential homeowners paid would not double. We would recalibrate, or Mr. Bain would recalibrate, the mill rate. Everything else being equal, if taxes didn't go up, but the property values of all the homes in Vancouver doubled, the mill rate would be cut in half. The product remaining the same, the product being the now new mill rate, half of what it had been, the new value of the property being double what it was, and A times B equaling C, the total amount of taxes each property paid. The homeowner's taxes, individually and as a class, would have remained constant, even though the value of their property had doubled. But Councillor Ladner would say that the sky is falling. And when we would ask him why is the sky falling, he would say, because now businesses are paying 10 to 1. And he'd be right. They'd now be paying per unit of worth 10 times as much. But that's really not relevant. In fact, it's a good thing that every year we recalibrate the mill rate up or down to take into consideration the fluctuation in property values. It's a good thing that we do that. It may result in a fluctuation in the ratio between different classes based on the worth of their properties. But that's not a negative, that's a positive. So for all of those reasons, I've been voting against the reconsideration, but I want to very, very quickly, in under 30 seconds, touch on the third point, which is what's good for business. At the end of the day, the best way to assist businesses is to not only keep the increase in the tax rate lower than what had consistently happened under the NPA, keep the increase in the taxes as we are doing at 2.9%, but in addition to that, support a healthy environment. Support a healthy, well-educated, well-read, literate population. One of the best ways of doing that is, again, to do what the NPA don't do, adequately fund libraries. And I predict that today we're going to see, on this issue, they vote the wrong way, and on libraries, they'll vote the wrong way. Thank you very much, Your Worship.
Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, in the last vote at council on this matter, if you recall, I did vote in favor of the shift. However, on this reconsideration, I'll be voting against, because I think this is a procedural matter. I think Councillor Lewis is absolutely correct. There has been no new information since the last council, and we had a very, very full discussion. And obviously, what's happening here is that Councillor Ladner just wants to keep going and going and going until he thinks he gets enough councillors to win the day. And if we did that with every time we vote, there'd be a never-ending reconsiderations of votes. So on procedural grounds, I am hopeful that other councillors might bring in some motions to help deal with the problem with small businesses. As we've all pointed out, this is a difficult situation for them. and I'm very sympathetic to that, and we'll look forward to motions coming forward in dealing with some of those problems.
Thank you. Councillor Lilly.
Just to be short on the point, Councillor Lewis has very clearly articulated what I was trying to express in a clearer form than I did. And so I thank him for that, because it is about share versus ratio. And if we're going to move to a ratio, then we should move into the ratio. If we're sticking with share, then let's stick with the share and quit pointing to the ratio as a reason for changing it, because it's unfair. Now, just on one point that Councillor Ladner made, that any shift would equate to 8 cents a day for our citizens, and he says that it's a relatively small amount and that everybody should be able to handle it, but it equates almost to the tax increase that we've approved for our city. And yet, so on one side of the equation, he says we've overspent, although we've spent on many very, very important things, childcare, libraries, new park space, all sorts of good things for our citizens, better services. And yet, on the other, he's saying that we've overspent, but just want to transfer more tax cost onto our residential owners. So I don't believe that that's an appropriate formula for Councillor Ladner to take, and he should really consider his arguments.
Councillor Roberts, second time.
No, I'm sorry, I would like to go ahead with the vote, and then I was going to introduce my motion. So.
Will you take the chair, Councillor Sullivan? I'd like to have something to say here. This is one of the things that drives me absolutely crazy. On one hand, we have the banks are bad, the revolution will be coming, and everything will be right with the world. On the other hand, we have, you know, we've spent too much money on all kinds of good, on things that we don't agree with, and so the reason that we find ourselves in this problem is because we're spendthrifts. The fact of the matter is this, and I think, quite frankly, the person who put it the best was Councillor Cadman. This is an inappropriate use of reconsideration, period. I'm sorry I was not here for this debate. I was sick. I wish I'd have been here. But the fact of the matter is that this is not something that should be for reconsideration. What we should be doing is we should be looking at ways to help small businesses, because they are going to go where they can get the best deal. And we do not want to end up with a city of residences with no head offices, no head banks, no Canfor, any of the rest of it. We do not want that to happen. And so we, as council, have a responsibility to take a look at fees, licensing, whatever the city has that goes into costs for those businesses, and figuring out a way to make this fair. Because it's not the owner of the land that is paying the bill here. It is the tenant, it's the renter, and it's exactly the same as Councillor Roberts said. If this now goes on to somebody who, for instance, maybe has a basement suite, do you think they're going to suck up whatever the payment is? No, it's going to be passed on. I wish I had been here to hear the whole debate. I wish I'd been here to hear all of the small businesses, but I wasn't. But this is not an appropriate use for reconsideration, and I will be voting against it. Seeing nothing further, all those in favor of reconsideration? Opposed? Councillor Ladner and Councillor O'Sullivan were